Welcome into the Locked On Knicks podcast. Gavin Shaw, Alex Wolf, and today I can say we are thrilled to be joined by Mike Richman of Locked On Blazers. You guys can probably guess what we're going to talk about, but Alex, what are we going to talk about?
Well, we're going to talk about just the Blazers in general. Just get a feel for what's going on over in Portland. What's the deal with Dame Lillard? What's the deal with Jusuf Nurkic? What's the deal with Anfernee Simons? But most importantly, what is the deal with pick number 7? And we'll, of course, get into at least one or two mock trades of how the Knicks could potentially acquire said pick 7. So you don't want to miss out. We're getting into it next on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast. We want to thank you for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day. We're now available on all platforms, including on YouTube, where you can see our smiling faces and you can see the smiling face of our guest, Mike Richman. Cool Background for Mike. A lot of art. I think I saw a very weird but interesting Bill Walton painting on his wall. But who's joining Mike? I'm Gavin Shaw, a play-by-play broadcaster at a whole bunch of places covering a whole bunch of different sports. You guys get the gist. He is Alex Wolf, editor-in-chief of The Strickland, the greatest Knicks website in the world. You can check them out on social media at thestrick.land. I will not delay the inevitable any longer. Let's get into everything Portland with Mike Richman. You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast. And as promised, we are joined by the fantastic Mike Richman of the Locked On Blazers podcast. And Mike, I want to just start as macro as possible with you. What is going on in Portland, man? We've talked about in our pod like a little bit just around the rumors that the Blazers might be willing to trade this 7th pick, but it seems like a team kind of caught between two identities because you still have, arguably the greatest player in franchise history in Damian Lillard. Obviously, he wants to win in a real way, but then you have Anfernee Simons. You have this team that essentially tanked down the stretch. You have that top 10 pick. What is the identity of this team and what are they striving for at this point?
Well, what are they striving for and what their identity is are two different things. What they're striving for is they want to be good. Like they want to be competitive. Dame's going to be like, he's under contract for 3 more seasons. I believe he is going to sign a max contract extension when he is eligible in July, which means he'll be under contract for 5 more years at, another $200 million coming his way, paid through his 35th birthday, like all the stuff. Like I think Dame's going to be a long-term commitment here. And if that's what they're going to do, they want to be good with him. And he has put some real pressure on them to like try to get good, but they don't have very many good players. Like the roster is bad. So that's hard. Those are 2 hard things to square because like you guys cover the Knicks. It's hard to be good when you don't have a lot of good players. So they're caught in this strange place where they want to be competitive and they're going to be aggressive to be competitive, but they're like several steps away. And one of those steps is whatever they do with the 7th pick in the draft.
Yeah. So this is, I was going to ask what the general situation is with Dame because it seemed like that was teetering on the brink of collapse. Like this time last year.
Yeah, last July, he was like, I haven't made up my mind what my future will be. And that was kind of the first time we'd ever heard him say that, which everybody hears that loudly when someone like Dame says it.
Yeah, which it has probably kind of put the Blazers' feet to the flames a little more. And then, you make the move to offload CJ McCollum, which then gets you this top 10 pick that you have here. If I'm not mistaken, correct? So this is
their own pick. The pick they got from CJ is a 2025 first from the Bucks, which is like so outrageous.
Yeah, that is far away. So yeah, it's just like there's a lot to sort of parse through. I guess, what do you think their motivations are with that 7th pick? Like, is your feeling right now that they're trying to use the pick to get better immediately with? Honestly, a draft that we've been talking about a lot is pretty flat after about pick 5 and really has a lot of guys that look like they could step in and contribute at an NBA level. Or do you think that they're more going to try to dangle that pick to get, say, I don't know, a secondary star like a Julius Randle or something?
Yeah, like a tall guy who's lived in 2 major American cities and also New Orleans. Yeah. They're going to trade the pick. All of the reporting suggests that they're going to trade the pick. Jason Quick of The Athletic, great Trailblazers beat writer, John Hollinger of The Athletic, Mark Stein also thinks they're like everybody who's plugged in thinks the Blazers are trading this pick. And it just kind of depends on what they trade it for. Do they trade back and try to get a vet and a draft pick in the teens, or do they swing for a bigger, brighter, rounder power forward that, is super left-handed?
I mean, it sounds like someone I know. I don't know. I mean, I guess I'll ask you, out of curiosity, what do you think? What do you think of Julius Randle? Quite frankly, I mean, just on a personal level, like, I think there's something maybe to be said. As someone who has now watched him for a couple of years, I think maybe a humbling would be good for him in many ways, and he might actually reclaim some combo of the really good things that he showed in New Orleans and the really good things that he showed with the Knicks, if he could just be thrust into an environment where he's obviously not the number one, which would obviously be the case in, Portland, where like Dame he's the alpha and the omega there. Like, there's no way that Julius Randle can walk into that locker room and be like, I'm the man here. Like, you're number two, period. Like, that's how it's going to go. You're going to run some pick and roll with Dame. You're going to, hit some open threes or whatever. Hopefully you're going to dive to the rim more like you used to, but also if we need you to get a bucket, you still have that ability that you really, honed and perfected with the Knicks. Like, I don't know. I guess that's probably kind of like my elevator pitch, but I would assume that he is one of the names that is sort of floated a little bit, around the Blazers, as far as a star type player that might be available. So, like, what are your thoughts on him right now going into the draft season here with that number 7 pick equipped?
Well, it's funny because I was a little worried that when I was getting ready for this, that I'm kind of not a Julius Randle guy. And I was like, oh man, I'm going to go on the Knicks podcast. I'm going to go on Locked On Knicks, and I'm going to be like, not so. But then I remembered,
you can't say anything worse than what we've said.
Yeah. I remembered that he's had some beef this year with the fan base, with, he's giving us the thumbs down to the great,
he's giving us different
people in New York
too.
City.
Yeah.
So I'm not a big Julius Randle guy. Like, I think he was really fun 2 years ago, like legitimately very fun, a revelation in that first year, but he also probably shot better than 3 than he's capable of. He just was like, he was on a heater for 8 months. And some of that might be just like he played with Derrick Rose and he got a little more space, and then he didn't have like a legitimate point guard, with all due respect to Emmanuel Quickley. And like, he was worse, but I think he just needs the ball in his hands. He's such a high usage guy. He's a really good passer, but he wants the floor to bend to him before he makes those good passes. He's not like a natural ball mover. I think he's a weird fit with Dame, because Dame hates playing off the ball. They tried it several seasons to get him someone that could let him get off the ball. He hates it. So it just seems like an awkward fit. That said, Julius Randle will be the Blazers' second best player the day he's like, if he were to come here, he'd be the second best player. Like, they need talent desperately. As I joked at the beginning of the show, he would be a massive talent upgrade.
What do you think Dame wants at this point? I think before we go into like more specifics on the trade for the 7th pick, it's almost worth establishing that, because I mean, to what Alex said, what you noted, Mike, like last summer, it seemed like he just went into, as much as I love Portland, as much as I love being the guy in Portland, I want to win a championship before my career is over, or I want to get a credible opportunity at a championship. Right. Maybe you disagree with this. I always felt there was a ceiling on him and CJ as a duo, and maybe not with the right teammates. Maybe there's a ceiling on a team with Dame as its best player. But even that aside, to your point, like Portland's supporting cast has probably never been worse than it currently is in like the vast majority of the Damian Lillard era. And he's presumably not getting better as a player at this point as he heads into his mid-30s. So how does this end in a way where all parties are happy? Is he content just getting paid a lot of money, scoring a ton of points, and being the guy in Portland? Or even if he signs a contract extension, do you think this inevitably hits a new breaking point and he says, wait, all of a sudden, I actually do want to win. Trade me somewhere else now that I've gotten my back?
I think that the executive getting fired last fall is an indicator that Damian Lillard won. Whatever that means. He won. He didn't want to be here in July. When we got to December, the lead decision maker got fired. Dame's still here and he's going to the draft lottery. To me, that signals that I don't know what one means. That's why I'm not like being specific. But to me, my read on it is that there was some beef and they chose Dame because why wouldn't you? I don't think it's that simple. Like I think there was more going on with the executive stuff, but I think Dame still being here when the decision makers are gone suggests that he will be here into the future. Obviously, there's a place down the line 2-3 years from now where he's like, well, I'm 35. This sucks. I want out. But I think for the next 3 seasons, there's some comfort here just because of the way last season played out, the way that he's been so vocal about, it's like almost a meme that every time Dame does a national interview, he has to talk about loyalty. It drives me insane, but there's some truth to it. There's some truth to it that he is like pretty loyal. And one of the ways that you show your loyalty is give him $100 million. That will really help everyone feel
very
more
loyal,
connected. But yeah, like I think he wants a credible shot. Like I think that's a good way to explain it. He wants a credible shot. And so now you get to this stage and we can talk about the specifics where a credible shot probably looks like adding veteran help around him. They haven't had a good forward core. They've had a really bad forward core. They have a really similar thing going with Dame and Anfernee Simons that they had with Dame and CJ McCollum. In fact, some would say the same thing going. So what they need to do is they need to get better forwards. And so that's why when they have the 7th pick and there is a certain forward available, it is a realistic opportunity. And just because I don't like it doesn't mean that Damian Lillard, who certainly has big influence on the roster, and the Joe Cronin and the Portland front office aren't considering the real possibility of making a deal with the Knicks.
All right, guys, we're going to take a quick break with Mike. When we come back, we're going to talk Anfernee Simons. Is there any chance that Simons could actually be the Knicks target at point guard this offseason? The latest on the Jusuf Nurkic situation and so much more. But first, I got to tell you guys how you can make a little bank watching this podcast. Are you looking for a daily fantasy option for the NBA? Then you need to try the award-winning app PrizePicks. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. I love it, and we know you will too. All you have to do is pick 2 to 5 players and an over/under on their projections, and you can win up to 10 times on any entry. It's just you versus the projected numbers. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. PrizePicks offers safe and fast withdrawals. It's an award-winning app that you can use on both the App Store and Google Play. They offer all the props you can think of: points scored, rebounds, even steals. They also allow mixed sport entries. So maybe you could throw some money down on Aaron Judge home runs versus Chris Kreider goals, 2 of my New York sports heroes who are doing just great as of late. And they don't just offer NBA, they offer college basketball, college football, NFL, MLB, soccer, MMA, so much more. So for limited times, PrizePicks has an exclusive no-brainer of an offer for all of our users. You get $50 for free if a player in your first PrizePicks entry scores just a single point, but you must use code NBA. That's right. This is an exclusive offer available to Locked On fans. Sign up today and use code NBA for $50 for free if a player in your first PrizePicks entry scores a single point.
Here's something interesting, because you mentioned Simons and the fact that they have a pretty similar, if not almost exactly the same thing going with him that they had with McCollum, which is probably why they felt inclined to say, you know what, let's get what we can for CJ McCollum right now, when he's probably at his highest value that he'll ever be as he hits, the decline of his career in all likelihood. Simons is probably going to get paid a decent amount of money this coming offseason. And, I was actually really surprised when I just looked at the cap sheet for the Blazers, because they actually have a pretty decent amount of cap space this coming offseason.
They could. They're probably unlikely to be a cap team, but they could have cap space, because to have cap space, they got to renounce Nurk and Joe Ingles and a couple of their other free agents. And then they would lose they have a big traded player exception they got from CJ McCollum, which is in part how they would get Julius Randle on the cheap. And so if they become a cap space team, it gets harder to make all of to have all the tools they need to get better. So they have some flexibility, but I don't think it's very unlikely that they end up as like a big cap space team, although they could clear $35 million relatively easily.
Yeah, that's the impression I'm getting looking at their cap sheet, is you'd have to make some pieces go around. I guess what I'm trying to get towards is there's 2 major free agents on the team this coming offseason. There's Simons and there's Nurkic. I was actually going to start with Simons, but we'll save him for a minute. I'm really curious about Nurkic, because he's, I think, one of the guys that seemed more so than Dame to be pretty unhappy with the situation, at least based off some of the reporting that I've read. He seems like he's basically fed up at this point. So, and he's going to be an unrestricted free agent. He's been, I think pretty underpaid for a while now, right? Like he was making.
He signed like a 4 for 48.
Yeah.
He hit free agency off kind of a down year and he signed 4 for 48. He has probably outperformed that. Availability is a big thing with Nurk. Obviously in 2019, he got hurt and then missed an entire year. So you could say like the freebie $12 million he got for not playing for an entire year kind of makes the whole thing not worth it, but he probably this season outperformed his contract. I think that's fair.
Yeah. So, where does that stand? Like, do you think that he's gone? Like, how much harder does that make life for the Blazers if he walks and you don't get anything for him? Because you're just talking about a talent deficiency. Like, he's been one of the most consistently good player when healthy, big caveat. Right. But I mean, when he's been healthy, he's been a great performer for them. I think every time I've watched him, I've always come away impressed. And, I feel like if they lose him, that's a huge step backwards. Like, do you think that there's also a world maybe where, I mean, this is a whole different thing, but like the Knicks have a free agent big man of their own, do you think that Portland might be in the market for a big man this coming off season as well, if Nurk walks, which seems to sort of be where things are leaning, at least to me, from my outside perspective?
So the only reason that I think Nurk is like that the cards are pointing the other direction for Nurk is that he agreed to not play the final 25 games of the year. Like they shut him down. And if he was really entering free agency, he had plantar fasciitis that he had reportedly been dealing with since September, but it came up when like they shut everyone down after the All-Star break. Like, and I hate the S word, but people have told me that Nurk was fine. So I don't want to question people's body, but I have heard pretty clearly that Nurk was fine. He could have played. And it's hard to convince a guy like Nurk, who durability has been a big thing, to sit out the final 24 games of the regular season entering free agency if you don't have some kind of wink deal going on. I mean, teams don't tamper. That's never happened. They would never agree to terms beforehand. Like you guys know, that's just like, it's not how the league works. But I think I have a hard time believing that there isn't an understanding that they're going to pay Nurk and Nurk's happy to get paid just because of the way his season ended.
All right. Moving on then to Anfernee Simons. There is a fixation with the New York Knicks rightfully on Jalen Brunson as the dude that they have to get at point guard this offseason. And the pivotal difference, obviously, between him and Simons is that he is unrestricted. Simons is restricted. So the only way I can phrase this is Simons, who was just, at least offensively, I can't speak to his defense, was at least spectacular down the stretch of the season. If I'm remembering correctly, like just flat out one of the best 3-point shooters in basketball. I mean, especially off the dribble down the stretch of the season, and very young because he came into the NBA at like 19, again, if I'm remembering correctly. Is there a number that would be too high for Portland to bring back Anfernee Simons, or is there no world where they're letting that kind of talent go? Because to your point, I mean, like however problematic the Dame CJ dynamic is, it's better than Dame and I don't fill in like random bench
Josh
Hart,
LRB,
whatever, whoever you want to say in there. So is it a sure thing, I guess, that Anfernee Simons is back on the Blazers, no matter what ridiculous offer another team throws his way?
I think there's probably a number, like I think his max number is 119. So it would be 4 for 119 from another team. That's probably too high for them. But like, are the Pistons going to offer Ant over DeAndre Ayton? Like, are we kidding? Like, if you're choosing which guy to give the max to, is Anfernee Simons going to get that over DeAndre Ayton? Or even like Miles Bridges, another restricted free agent on the market? Like, I think those dudes are just straight up have just so much more production that like, if a team is going to throw max cap space at someone, it's going to be those two gentlemen. I think Ant comes back. I think like 4 for 90 is pretty much in his range. I think 4 for 100, if his agent really squeezes the Blazers, is definitely in the range. But I think they're going to pay him because if you trade CJ and you do all these things and then you lose and then you cheap out on Ant, then Dame leaves. Like then he leaves. So I think part of the plan was clear the books, re-sign Ant, probably re-sign Nurk unless you find a sign and trade, and then build with your parts, your other tools when you as an over the cap team. And those other tools are this draft pick they can trade and a big traded player exception to absorb a big contract and some flexibility down the line to like have a Julius Randle on the roster making $25 million a year and say like, we don't have other bad money on the books so we can afford it.
All right, we'll be back with the moment of truth, which you've all been waiting for, where I pitch Mike a trade for the 7th pick, as well as he pitches a trade back to us. And then starts a really intriguing conversation on Julius Randle and what sort of fit he could be for the Portland Trailblazers. But first, I got to remind you guys, today's episode is brought to you by rockauto.com. And you guys know what time of year it is. It's time to work on your car. You want to do it. We just had that little heat wave over the weekend. You don't want to be doing it out in like 100-degree heat like that. So while we're getting this nice sort of spring weather that's coming back in, get some parts for your car. Get that project you've been trying to get done so that it's done for the summer. Especially if it's your air conditioning. I got to do that myself. I'm very much behind on fixing that. But when you do that, you don't want to go to a brick and mortar auto parts store, because you go there, they never have the parts you need. They say they're going to order it for you. You get the price sheet. You're like, ugh, is that what that costs? And then you're like doing the math in your head, like, oh crap, should I just go to the mechanic? And they say, no, you know what? I want to do something. I want to do this myself. So you order it. And then they say, okay, come back in a few days to our store. I'm like, ugh. So now I don't get to do my project today. And I got to drive back to your store. And I got to pay out the butt for this thing. Not a fun combo. That's where rockauto.com comes in. You could save time and money when you use Rock Auto. Why would you want to spend 30%, 50%, or in some cases even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or a car dealership? Never buy parts from a car dealership. For example, the Honda Odyssey, you're fixing the family van that has a fuel pump for $353 from a chain store, just $216 from rockauto.com. All, original parts that slot right into your car, and they're not going to upcharge you on anything or try to upsell you in any sort of way. So if you want to go to rockauto.com right now, check and see all the parts available for your car or truck. And if you decide to pull the trigger on something, right, Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box, so they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. Okay, well, you brought it back to Julius Randle. I'm just going to ask the question point blank period that I'm sure that everybody listening to our show right now wants to know the answer to. And you could say this purely from your perspective. You can throw in like, if the S words have said anything to you, or if you have any general idea. But let's just say a deal is offered. It is more or less Julius Randle for the 7th pick. And let's say that the Knicks also say, we'll take Eric Bledsoe, and I could see he's got a partially guaranteed deal. I don't know how much of that is guaranteed or whatever, but like they say, like, we'll take him and take on the onus of waiving him and eating whatever money he's owed. Is that a deal that the Blazers seriously look at, or do they kind of like laugh and hang up the phone and say, nah, come back when you're willing to include at least like a young player or something, or like your 11th pick or whatever? Like, what's your general read on a deal like that?
My read is that they would absolutely consider it because they want veteran help, and Julius Randle, like I said, would be the second best player on their basketball team. Blazer fans are going to hear that and be really mad that I disrespected Nurkic, and I'm sorry, y'all, but I don't even like Julius Randle, and I think that's true. But I think they would consider it. I think they would consider it because I think they're going to move that pick for some flavor of veteran help. Whatever that might be. The big name that they've been linked to is Jeremy Grant. Do I think trading the 7th pick for Jeremy Grant or Julius Randle is a good idea? Hell no, I do not. But I am not someone about to celebrate my 32nd birthday in July with a real obsession with winning a championship and a great deal of power in the Blazers organization. That's another dude. I'm just a podcast host who's like, reads the cap sheet. I think, well, let me turn this back on you. Let me ask you, are the Knicks so willing, in your view, to get out from under Julius Randle and kind of start the next era that they would say 11 and Julius Randle for 7 and like the 36th pick in the draft, and we'll see what happens? Like, is that a realistic pitch back to the Knicks as a counteroffer?
Yeah, it's Alex, let me know if you concur on this. It would be a situation of who's available at 7. And I think that would be a draft night type decision. Like, is a Shaedon Sharpe, someone that the Knicks just see with all their Kentucky connections and say, we're pretty sure this guy is going to be a star. We know he's not going to make it to 11. Let's take that swing, because I think there is a general willingness to move off of Julius Randle. We had Mark Berman of the New York Post on last week, and he was talking about how Obi Toppin really opened some eyes with his play down the stretch last season, and that created this notion within the organization that, hey, we might have a really good power forward here. For whatever Julius brought a season ago, there's a lot of problematic off the court stuff. There's a whole lot of problematic on the court stuff last season. We can maybe get rid of this headache and actually turn him into a positive asset. You mentioned John Hollinger earlier. He put out the notion a little while ago that Julius was flat out, no qualifiers, a negative asset at this point. That there's been other people who have said similar things. Alex and I have kind of pushed against that, and we're both of the mind like it only takes one team. And there are still teams who see him as the guy who made second team All-NBA a year ago, and just don't really have another pathway to acquiring anyone who's been in that conversation in recent memory. So I do think he's an asset. I do think he's one the Knicks are willing to move off of. The question of whether they'd include 11 versus like the future Dallas pick or some lesser asset, I think the dream for the Knicks would be that they could somehow end up with 7 and 11, maybe package those to move up even further in the draft, because I don't know if they want to take 2 rookies. But Alex, I'll throw that your way, because I don't even think that's a scenario we've discussed where they'd potentially end up with the 7th and the 11th pick, just because the idea of just trading Julius Randle straight up for a top 10 pick is kind of mind blowing to me.
Yeah, I think I'm mostly with you. I think that if I mean, this is completely, no sourcing, no intel of any sort, but like my general thought would be that they would probably try to go like Julius Dallas pick for number 7, especially if they could also say to Portland, like, yo, we'll take, like I said, like, we'll take back Eric Bledsoe and just save you guys the money, whatever, like do a little favor for you here or there. Maybe even just say, hold on to that 36 pick as well, and we'll give you this Dallas pick, because it's going to be like 20 somethingth pick. So you can have that. That's cool. I think that would be their ideal. I don't think they would hang up the phone, depending on, like Gavin said, who's there at number 7. Like, I think there's a world where maybe they fall in love with, even if it's not Shaedon Sharpe, who I think will probably go in the top 5. Maybe it's, maybe a Jaden Ivey falls and maybe they're super in love with him, which they should be, because he's like perfect for the team. Or maybe it's like Keegan Murray. Like maybe Keegan Murray falls and then they're like, look, this is a seamless fit. This dude will come right in and be able to do, at least some of the stuff that Julius was doing, and be much younger and, more malleable, less likely to sort of hijack things. And we can also elevate Obi over him and have him back up Obi instead of vice versa. And let Obi kind of take over as the new starting power forward. I think they would prefer, like Gavin said, to hold on to both those picks and then maybe even try to package those one more time and move up and see if they can maybe get like Detroit to sway or something, and let them get like a Shaedon Sharpe, because I get the feeling they would really love to go for him. But I don't think you're getting a Jaden Ivey or Shaedon Sharpe without getting inside the top 5, because that seems to be like the more or less consensus top 5 right now. They might also just love staying at pick 7. Like I have a favorite in the draft, Dyson Daniels, who's I'm seeing a lot of stories about how he's generating top 10 buzz now. As Gavin mentioned, we talked to Mark Berman last week, and he said that the Knicks talked to him, and that Dyson was speaking pretty highly of how the Knicks representatives were talking to him about their potential interest levels. So yeah, I don't know. It's a tough thing, right? Like I'm kind of blown away by the fact that you weren't like, ha, screw you, like hang up the phone.
Well, I wouldn't do it. Like I hate it. I'm saying the Blazers
but
might.
The Blazers even, like even just trying to project what the Blazers would do, I'm kind of surprised. I think the Knicks they would really be trying to get something else back in that deal. Yeah. Maybe it's even just saying like, okay, like we'll do 11 and Julius if we get 7. What was it? Pick 36?
Yeah, 36.
736 and Keon Johnson, maybe. Like just give us another ball of clay. Give us another something to play with here, know? Like the guy who's 2 years away from being 2 years away. We'll take him and we'll see what we can do. Maybe it's something like that. I don't know. But I do think there's a world where they would entertain it. I also think that there's a world where potentially the Knicks front office is still looking at him like, no, I think we can still milk more value out of him. And just like the situation with Dame, the situation with Julius is kind of confusing too, because like we were thinking, oh, it seems like Julius is on the outs. He like pouted after the Knicks young players had a big comeback in one game against the Bulls, which was really bizarre, and like stormed off the court even though his team just won a big comeback game. And, we thought like, oh, this must be it. And then he was sitting courtside with, Worldwide Wes and whoever else showed up to the Dallas and Utah game. And it was like, oh, all right. Is he like recruiting with them right now? Like, what the hell is going on here? So I don't know. It's a tough situation to read. So I don't know if the Knicks still view his value one way or the other. But again, if it was me, I would jump all over that deal, even if it was just a swap and you just get like another second round pick or something, because then they could use their second round pick of that Blazers second round pick and potentially trade back into the first round, maybe to their magical spot of 25, at which they turn into just great rotation players every single year.
But they always find a rotation player at that spot.
They're great at the 25th pick. So I would definitely, like that deal that you said, I would definitely consider it very strongly.
So I guess if I can hijack this again,
please,
what has, in your eyes, from second team All NBA Julius Randle, like what other than he shot 20% worse from three, what really changed from the guy who was one of the 25 best players in the league to whatever he was this year?
It was here.
Alex. I'll leave that to Alex to talk about. I'll say purely from an on-court sense, I think the context shifted a little bit in that Kemba Walker was added to the team. Evan Fournier was added to the team. RJ Barrett was ready to take a step forward. And I think Julius thrives when there's zero ambiguity to his role and it's just very direct. And it's like, hey, man, it's your show. Go to work. And where he was sort of magical, I mean, it was number one, it was the shot making, right? Like 3-point shooting, way beyond anything he'd done in his career. Even more than that, it just seemed like he was automatic on these super tough turnaround fadeaways. Like he looked like, honestly, like his initial mentor when he came into the NBA, Kobe Bryant, at times working in the mid post, working from the elbows. And it was that combined with like a little bit of the power game that defined the early parts of his career. But even that wasn't all that present last year. And the shot fell off. And even more than, or along with the shot falling off, last year it felt like he just knew where everyone was on the court at all times, and he could dictate the action by playing bully ball, drawing a double team, and then throwing like a no-look hook pass across the court on the dime to Reggie Bullock on the opposite wing. Because that's what Reggie Bullock did, right? He sat on the wing. But then he's playing with all these guys this year that wanted their own offense, wanted their own roles, and it wasn't quite as clean. His role wasn't quite as defined, and it was almost like he is kind of a robotic basketball player to some extent. And it's almost like he malfunctioned and didn't know where those pre-assigned reads were anymore. And a lot of his passing went away. And then his effort, and Alex, I'll throw this to you to rant about, or maybe just be very brief about, because you spent enough time on it. His effort just fell off a cliff. And there were just so many times, like you would just see him screaming at a ref instead of running back on defense, or just look disinterested when other guys were going off. And he frankly wasn't a very good team player this season.
I think you can boil it all down, at least to the between the ears stuff, which I think is definitely the biggest thing. Because look, for most players, if the new foul rules at the beginning of the year were affecting your play, or if having crowds back was affecting how you were shooting, or whatever, you adjust and you make those things better. And that's how the great players sort of, like we saw, for example, a much hated player to us, Trae Young, like he started off the year really struggling thanks to the new officiating and stuff. And then he figured it out and he finished the year really good and looked really good still. Julius never really did that. I think you could boil it down to like one thing that he said, and it was in the very first game of the season. He's coming off a All-NBA second team, performance, and, leading the Knicks back to the playoffs the year prior. Every person in New York loved him to death and was super excited for this coming season. And in the first game of the season, he's making buckets down the stretch of a 2 OT game against the Celtics. And the first thing that he thinks of to do is like start screaming at the crowd, and to nobody in particular, "I want my respect." And it's just like, that sort of felt like what this whole year was. Like he thought, I've made a leap to, the upper echelon, the top 10 to 15 players in the NBA, thanks to being a second team All-NBA guy last year. So why am I not being treated like one, whether it's on my own team or, by the officials or what have you? Like the whole year seemed like he just had this chip on his shoulder that essentially boiled down to, I was so good last year, so therefore I've earned this, and like I've essentially paid my dues. And that just led to him not, like, he, as Gavin said, was mailing it in on defense a lot. I mean, there was like at least 3-4 instances of every game where you could see him not making a read, not making a rotation. That was literally all he would have had to do is just stay somewhat alert, and he could have made it, but he kind of just decided not to play on that end for stretches of this year. He off the court, there was telling fans like, say, oh, what did the thumbs down mean to the fans? Oh, it meant F you to the fans. It's like, that's very candid and very, just because they were booing you because the team was doing terrible and then you guys turned it around, then they cheered for you. Go figure. Like, that's how these things work.
That's like, New York, man.
Exactly. That's every team. My God, like any team's fans will boo their team if they come out and they're dogging it. It's like, that's not exclusive to New York. And, I don't know. I think it all boiled down to things just sort of went downhill, and then mentally, I don't want to speak to like try to be an amateur sports psychologist. I said this all year, but like something was clearly off. I don't want to speculate as to what it was, but like something was off with him this year, and it had to do a lot with his relationship with the fans, I think. And just adjusting to having fans back in the building, I guess, and like having to be held accountable on an off shooting night or something. It also doesn't really help that Obi is like the most loved player on the team. And so if Randle was dogging it a little bit, fans would immediately start chanting Obi, like trying to get Obi on the floor. I get the feeling that probably didn't rub him the right way as well. It was just a lot of different factors, but I do think, again, I think a lot of it came down to he thought I should be the man on this team. And then especially like down the stretch too, once RJ Barrett kind of started getting slotted into that role more than him, I think that rubbed him the wrong way. That's why I do think, though, there is a chance that maybe something could work on a team like the Blazers with a defined number one, because I think there's no way that he could walk into that situation and say, no, you're wrong. Damian Lillard should not be the number one. I should be the number one. And maybe then you can talk him back into like, Julius, you're a big guy. Like, why don't you go back to doing what you did in New Orleans and being like a 92nd percentile roll man in the pick and roll, right, and, working off of somebody. So there's a lot to it. I can't think, and I've been following the Knicks for probably 22 whatever out of my 32 years of existence. Like, I can't think of another scenario where there was ever such a like reach the highest highs and then plunge to the lowest lows situation
in 3.5 months.
Yeah, in Knicks history. So it was a really bizarre situation. It was bizarre for us to cover it, and we still don't really know the answers, I feel like. But he still said he's committed to the team. Leon Rose has still said they're committed to him. But I kind of feel like that's just talk at this point. I feel like they are going to potentially look to move on. But I don't necessarily know that he's like broken per se. I think things just kind of have officially broken down with the Knicks more so than anything.
Is second year Tibbs a thing?
It was
like,
something.
Is that it? Like, is this just like the poison of a second year of Tom Thibodeau?
No.
Is there anything there?
No, Tibbs, if anything, empowered him too much. Like, that was the biggest thing. Tibbs needed to step in and get on his case more. And instead it was kind of like there was a certain code of conduct that existed for everybody else, and then a certain code of conduct that existed for Julius Randle. And Randle was not held to having to play good defense and do all the things that all the young players had to do to hold their playing time, like Obi Toppin, who struggled to get like 15 minutes a game. He was allowed to basically just go do whatever the heck he wanted on the court, and he would have guaranteed 35 minutes waiting for him. So I guess you could say that that's like the Tibbs effect in some ways, but
it's not the way that we would typically describe it, that he's like worn a guy out. It's the reverse. Yeah,
exactly. It's not like they ground each other's gears too much. It's almost like Tibbs liked him too much and empowered him too much and created strife that way, where it was just like Tibbs was too lenient on him. I don't know, Gavin, did you have any sort of different read on that situation?
No, I think that's exactly right. And I think it was ultimately very counterproductive, because as much as the Knicks team is just filled with seemingly very good dudes and very good teammates and guys who I think by and large like loved Julius a year ago, and especially the younger guys on the team probably saw him as like a mentor and a leader. I can't imagine. I think that had to create some resentment. And when you saw things get really bad by the end of the year, like that aforementioned Bulls game, I would think, just connecting the dots here, part of that was that a lot of resentment had built up to him, and the fact that Julius could spend like an hour screaming at a ref and like not getting back on defense, but Obi Toppin like missed 1 3-pointer in the wrong way and he was immediately pulled out of the game. Like I can't imagine if you're Obi, like at some point, like there was probably resentment going both ways there, which is weird to say because Obi Toppin seems like the happiest, go luckiest, like nicest dude in the world. But I think some of that was going on. I will say if you want to just say something positive about Julius Randle, just in case any important decision
let's
makers,
close with something nice.
Yeah, and in case any important decision makers in Portland are listening, which I doubt, but you never know.
Oh, I bet some low-level decision makers listen every once in a while. So let's see what
there you go.
If any of y'all made it to 35 minutes,
that's where the good stuff comes in. He had the 7-game stretch. I think it was Alex. It was right before the All-Star break, right now, right after. Yeah,
where it was right before the trade deadline, where he saved his job essentially.
There you go. Where he averaged something like about 30 points, like 10, 11 rebounds, 7, 8, 9 assists per game, and every night was just killing it. And the key to that was he was bringing the ball up the court a lot, and out of nowhere, he went from playing at like the most stagnant pace in the world and looking like a turtle, like mid-stroke, to really like speeding it up and being hyper aggressive and throwing his body around. It was like someone like just took him aside and shook him and said, "Hey, you're like 6'7", 260 with inhuman coordination at that size. Take advantage of it. You don't have to shoot pull-up 2s or pull-up 3s every time around." And he started just bulldozing people. In turn, he got a little bit of confidence. The jumper came back to some extent. And he's 27 years old. Like there's so much ability in there. There's a great basketball player in there. When he rolled to the basket this year, even on a Knicks offense that didn't have a lot of other threats, like he would just create these great openings, and he could really swing the ball around on the short roll because he is like, even when he doesn't have his pre-assigned reads, he's still a talented passer, but he just has to get the ball on the run. He has to play with pace. And the thing about Damian Lillard, and to your point, this would take maybe some sacrifices from Lillard and some really big sacrifices from Randle. Those two running a pick and roll with a guy like Dame, who, I mean, after Steph Curry and along with Trae Young, like more than anyone else in the league, you have to guard 35 to basically 40 feet from the basket. Julius rolling into huge amounts of space with his size and speed and passing ability is scary. Like if he buys into that role, that's one of the more dynamic offensive duos in basketball. And I don't think it's an exaggeration to say there's a reason this dude was second team All-NBA. He's immensely talented. And even in that second team All-NBA year, I don't think he was taking advantage of the full extent of his abilities because he stopped going to the rim quite as much as he did in previous seasons. You combine all the best parts of his game, there's a tantalizing player in there. And I think Dame is about as equipped as any point guard in the league to unlock the best out of him. If you want to make a case for why Portland should do that and why he might end up being worth more than the 7th pick.
Can he be a good defensive player? I know that when
absolutely.
they were good, a lot of it was that they had good center play, and they kind of lost that last year. Can he be a good defender?
Yes, absolutely. He was a great defender in 2021. I mean, I wouldn't even just say a good defender. Like he was great. He was the star of the show on defense on some nights with his one-on-one defense and stuff like that. Like he would get a switch on to like Luka or something like that and totally own that matchup and play great. So I think he could definitely, I mean, he's great at keeping guys in front of him. His team defense, especially if his lock-in level isn't as high as it should be, leaves a lot to be desired sometimes, but especially like on switches and stuff, nobody can really punish him on a switch. Like he can stand up a center. He can, rotate with a guard. He can do whatever. Like his hips are very flexible. He's built like a, brick S house.
Yeah, he's huge.
He's a big dude.
Different S that time than the aforementioned S.
Yeah, different S. Yeah. So yeah, he can and has been a not just a good, but like a great defender at times. And that was actually one of the biggest standout things of his 2021 as well, was seeing just how good of a defender he was that year.
Oh yeah, they were a great defensive team. I just I felt like last year they're really missing how good Nerlens was that year, and
definitely
just a lot of Mitch Rob not being healthy. And
that was a big part of it. But surprisingly, the Knicks were still like a top 10 defense this past year.
They're an above average defensive team
because they just had a good scheme and they executed it pretty well, even despite some of the guys like Kemba Walker being a total turnstile and Julius many nights not really caring. RJ Barrett's defense falling off a bit after he took on more of an offensive role. So yeah, he's been a part of a really good defense, and it wasn't, don't let anybody tell you that it's all the center play, because they've had some good perimeter defense, and you don't get a top like 5 defense with just good center play. Everybody's
I was mostly
contribute to
talking
that,
scheme
so.
stuff. Like the scheme is like, hey, we're going to funnel you to the rim, and there's going to be this octopus arm dude at the rim.
But it's not all that. You know what I mean? That there was a lot of good individual defensive performances by
what's the
Randle.
Nerlens Noel thing? Is that he doesn't have real human hands? He has some other hands. I know this is like a Nick fan thing.
Yeah. That was actually I think everybody came up with their own variation. One person on my website came up with like a little like video where it was various things that Nerlens Noel has instead of hands. But I think the most popular one was ping pong paddles.
There you go.
Ping pong paddles for hands, or balloons for hands.
Balloons, I think, is the one I'm thinking of. Yeah.
Blown up surgical gloves for hands.
He's very S hands, I would say.
Yeah. So anyway, I think we've. Wow.
So I think if you made it this, if you're a Blazer fan, you made it this far on the podcast, it really got good for Julius Randle at the end. Pretty good pitch. Think about 7 and 11 for Julius Randle, or maybe 7 in the Dallas pick for Julius Randle. Think about it, because he would be the second best player on the team.
Yeah, he definitely could be, especially behind an alpha like Damian Lillard. But Mike, thanks so much for popping on, man. We really appreciate you coming on and giving us this Blazers perspective, because, like I said, I think a lot of Knicks fans are really eyeing up that 7th pick, saying like, man, wouldn't that be nice to get back into the top 10, where a lot of fans wish the team could have been anyway, had they chosen to just tank like a normal team and rested all their players, but not under Tibbs. Never.
Yeah, I mean,
none of our guys had plantar fasciitis, unfortunately.
Yeah, I watched the team aggressively tank. It wasn't particularly fun.
It's not
maybe
fun.
Was the right strategic move, but it was a brutal final 25 games in Portland.
We've watched a whole 82 game season like that.
Yeah,
it's
I
not
hear you.
Fun.
Well,
but anyway,
thanks for having me. It was a ton of fun.
I was about to say, do you want to let everybody know where to find you, online and all that good stuff? Where to find you?
Don't follow me on Twitter. It's a terrible place, but listen to the podcast at Locked On Blazers is with that handle, and just search Locked On Blazers. You'll find us wherever you're looking for us. 5 days a week, free on all platforms. Never a dime will charge you. It's free. Just search Locked On Blazers. Tell your friends to do the same. And it's the only Daily Trailblazers podcast, so get your fix in.
Wow, what a world! There's so many Daily Knicks podcasts. But anyways, thank you so much, Mike. We'll be sure to have you back on if and when this trade does happen. If those low-level decision makers buy what I'm selling, we'll talk to you then. But until then, be good, and everyone listening, be good. We will talk to you all soon on Locked On Knicks.